wrong with trying to expand that in a way? Like, expand your target audience? Like, even if someone isn't into...
In what way?
We're going.
Oh,
But what way? Give me a specific, Andrew. We're live.
Maybe someone that's, like, not into fitness or into, like, sports specifically, but like the message and the person behind it. Is that something that's, like, not...
I mean, I would be like, we're going to do, like, what does that mean to me?
I mean, like, still, like, don't really change anything, but is there a way that, I guess, like, is it something that would be an option to, like, try to expand, like, an audience reach? Like, is that...
Yeah, I think that's...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think as long as if we're defining what the channel is and just saying, like, it's within this parameter, I think to a point, yeah. I mean, I would even argue this. Like, we're talking about creatine and okay, so maybe this is a good discussion, and we're live right now on YouTube. But if we're trying to expand the conversation, it's like somebody like you. Actually, one of the agents came up and was talking to me on Monday, and he's interested. He doesn't lift. He doesn't really exercise, but he's interested in nutrition, and he's interested in creatine. He loves creatine. He's like, I take creatine for cognitive aspects. If I take it in the morning, I feel really good, and it also helps me with my migraines. To me, it's like that's outward reaching. That's what that would, but it's still within the confines of the channel.
That's fair enough. I think you answered, like, that was...
If you have other ideas, I mean, I'm all ears. Because I think about that. Owen Horgan, you just texted me. I saw your text come through before we even start to get live on this, because I want to start talking about some of the endurance aspects. We got a really good paper we're going to break down. We're going to go into some of the different types of endurance that athletes should focus on. And Owen actually just texted me, said, geez, Owen, you... And we also have a poll that we ran. If you guys look, there's interval plyometrics as the leader on what's your favorite way to improve endurance work inside the gym. Interval plyometrics. That's interesting. I would prefer a salt bike. Coach, I'm finalizing my own ice skills plan for the next 6 months outside of my workouts throughout this offseason. 6 months you're setting this up, Owen. Jeez. You're trying to periodize your skills sessions similar to the workouts, doing more skills sessions as the season goes on. How many skills sessions should I be doing for the next 2 weeks of exposure phase? I would say 2 to 3 a week max. I think 2 is plenty, but tell me what you think. All I'm doing right now is a morning high-intensity skating lesson. That's great, but that is a part of the workout plan. How many more could I do? I'd say add one more. And what should they consist of? Should they be more conditioning, skating based, or more skills, lower intensity? I think skills 100% right now, all skills. Again, add another one, maybe a second one of all skills, and I think that's going to help you. Yeah, text me what you think about that. I know I'm checking in on the live while I'm doing that, but yeah, let me know what your thoughts are, Owen. So, Aaron, you got the Nike Salvios. That's good. I like those. That's good that the plan's going well. Yeah, creatine is a huge something that a lot of people use for one, if they have headaches, two, if they've had like trauma in a car accident or something like that, but also just it's showing a massive amount of impact on longevity of the brain. And I mean, even in the sense that women, when they're breastfeeding, they're depleting their creatine sources. So women, if they are breastfeeding and they're taking creatine, that's showing a positive impact on the infant and them and the mother while dealing and leading to a prevention of oh my gosh, I can't think of the word when someone gives birth and they tend to like get depressed afterwards. Jesus, that's terrible. But the creatine is showing to decrease depression after birth. Also, stroke victims, creatine can help with as well. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that creatine can play that impact. And I even think that there's some aspects of creatine as far as endurance is concerned. I think there's a fair amount of research or a fair amount of literature that will show you that, let's say if I have a max bench press, right, and I hit a 405 bench, right, so I hit 405, I should be able to get 315 for like 10. Okay, that's usually like a rule of thumb that you can see. Okay, so if I can hit 315 for 10, now postpartum depression. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, KP. Now if I'm taking creatine, okay, and I'm using that, and let's say I hit like a 405 bench press, again, that's my max, I'm probably going to be able to hit like 315 for 12 to maybe 13 reps. And what's interesting then is that once I hit that, now my increase, I will also see a greater rate of force development. So I'll probably be able to bench like 415 to 420. I might add like 10 pounds just from that creatine usage. And we'll go into that a little bit here with this study that we're going to go into around that. But I think that when we're looking at the different types of endurance that athletes should focus on, that's where some of the stuff that we've been talking about with breaking up sports and looking at like, okay, if I have this type of athlete here, they're a shot putter, this is what their endurance is going to look like. They need to throw 30 throws a session, or they're a power lifter. They need to be able to do like 10 to 12 working sets a session if they're a power lifter, okay? Or if we go to like the next level, now if we have like running backs, linebackers, they have some locomotion based endurance, some velocity based endurance that they need to maintain, but they also need to have strength endurance, okay? Then we get to the next level. Okay, now we have a wrestler. So this wrestler is going to actually have to have some type of like classical endurance, okay? And you guys voted on what's your favorite way to improve endurance in the gym. Not everybody liked the assault bike, but you did like the interval plyometrics. Well, that's a unique way for someone like a wrestler to improve their endurance on the mat. I hope you guys are watching the NCAA tournament going on right now. South Dakota State still has, I think, 5 or 6 guys still in the tournament, 2 guys in the quarterfinals, wrestling the next like hour and a half. Cal Swenson's probably wrestling right now. Actually, he almost had a huge upset last night. Now, the next thing would be, okay, now how do we train endurance if you've got a shot putter who needs endurance in the circle, but then you go all the way to like a lacrosse player? Well, lacrosse, they're running 5 to 7 miles a game at high speeds. They're going to need even more endurance that's like classically based, like longer, slower distance will pay off more for them, along with some speed stuff. And then finally, what about endurance when you're training a marathoner, or you're training a 1,500 meter runner, or you're training a triathlete, or you're training an endurance swimmer? So every sport has to have endurance so that we can endure those repetitions that we need to focus on. But where we've sort of let people down, and I think using Owen as an answer, as a example here, is that Owen is an ice hockey player. Okay, so ice hockey has a large component of endurance. However, here, one thing we got to keep in mind is that the endurance for ice hockey is much more interval based, especially if you're playing on a bigger team that has 3 shifts. If you have a bigger team that has 3 shifts, now you're going to have shorter time on the ice, or less time on the ice, so you can go harder. It's much more interval based. The downfall here is that oftentimes people will say, so we should train only interval based because that's how the sport is. Yes and no. You should do some interval-based training, but the strength and conditioning coach needs to understand how much work with the specific sport is interval-based. Okay, so if I'm training Owen as an ice hockey player, as he gets closer to the season, we're pretty far out from the season right now. As he gets closer to the season, we need to be doing less interval work because his team will be doing more of that interval carryover. We could probably do more speed work and more work like, hey, get on the assault bike, go ride for 45 minutes at 50 RPMs. Go sit in the sauna for 30 minutes. That's going to increase your LSD. Okay, that's how there's like a very precise game that we're playing. And the interesting part that's going on right now, endurance for powerlifting and strongman is going to be very different than endurance for an ice hockey player, a wrestler, a marathoner. And a metal vocalist, frontman, that is a lot of endurance. I think that with opera singers as well. So I think that where the strength and conditioning community has let down athletes is that we haven't clarified what types of endurance are best for them or what percentages. And that's something that I'm trying to work through right now. Is that I've been spending quite a bit of time researching like force velocity curve. And I've noticed, like, for myself personally, okay, I don't think it should be called the force velocity curve. I think it should be called the loaded versus unloaded test. I genuinely think that's what we should be calling the force velocity curve. And I'm being influenced by Dan Cleather and a lot of his content that he's put out, a lot of his books, or his two main books that sort of bring this to light. And then as I'm sort of studying it further and further and working with speed stuff, and also looking at the research that we've done here on site with like force or with velocity based training, it makes me realize, okay, if we're training, why would we have just force and just velocity? And also, by the way, they're not inversely related. They correspond with one another. Okay. So then that goes into, if we can break down as strength coaches how much speed work we need to do, meaning locomotion work. How much impulse work do we need to do, meaning something like a power clean, a vertical jump, a hurdle hop, something along those lines, a power snatch. Large amount of force, short period of time. Okay, the impulse is going to be force, and time is noted in there. Okay, then you can look at how much absolute strength does a specific sport need, and then you can look at, okay, how much endurance does this sport need? And then we look at the ratios, and then we look at the tests for that sport. So if we took somebody like an 800-meter runner, having them do a max deadlift or a max power clean really isn't going to determine how successful they are in their sport of running an 800. Whereas having a football player do a max power clean and a max back squat probably will have a pretty big determination, because they have an opponent. They have to have max strength. They also have to have that high impulse expression. So then that's going to lead us to the specific types of endurance that are going to be beneficial for them. And it's going to lead us to the specific types of tests, and the tests help us determine the endurance. Okay. So, the tests that are associated with your specific group of sports. Okay. So I'm hoping this is making sense. So, load and velocity would probably be a good one, Matt B, because if you're looking at load, it would be light load versus heavy load. What's the velocity return? So it's like, load versus velocity instead of, this is great. And this is where like doing these lives comes into play. It's like, okay, so right now it's called force velocity curve. Okay. If we looked at it and termed it loaded versus unloaded test, or load velocity curve, and then you can see like in the individual, there should be some type of, as the load increases, the velocity sort of should decrease, on the relatively same continuum. However, when we're using the force velocity curve, or when we're using the load and velocity in this case, we would be able to identify in some athletes that the velocity doesn't diminish as much when they are using more load, because there might be strength-based athletes. And then if we see if somebody's velocity just drops off, it plummets when we put load on them, well, then they're probably sprint-based or something like that, and maybe we need to increase their strength levels. Maybe we don't, but that's where I think the weakness of the force velocity curve comes into play. And I think it's been used. Like Faris Khan was here in the fall, and I think he did a fantastic job on how he determines training people off of the curve. I still think there's a lot of gray area for me individually. Actually, he was sort of like the first person that I was around who really, really thoroughly explained it. And I liked how he used it for his training prescriptions, but I was still not sold on the curve itself. I'm sold on how Faris trains people 100%. So it's an interesting thing, because I think that there might be better ways to build from that. But let's get back to the endurance stuff. Is like, I think that when we think about endurance, we're just thinking about cardio. We're not thinking about like, some athletes like wrestlers, I remember this is a conversation that we had with Nick Gwizdowski, who you can see right here, actually. Okay. So this is Nick. He's a 2-time world bronze medalist. We worked with him up until 2022, I think, is when he ended up leaving and going to work with his new strength coach, which is great, right? Like we started working together at the end of 2016 or the beginning, I want to say March of 16, maybe April of 16, all the way to 2022. We got 2 world bronze medals on the journey. And one of the things that Nick would say was when we would train together, we would do some bodybuilding style work at the end of a session. And he would always say, man, this is like how I feel at the end of a match. And I think that what's interesting in a sport like wrestling is that I think you genuinely need some aerobic capacity. You need some long, slow distance. You need something that's going to improve your VO2 max. And you also need something that's going to improve your strength endurance. So that's sort of like this keystone sport. Whereas if you take wrestling and you say, okay, some of the aspects of wrestling, you need classical endurance on this side. Some of the aspects of wrestling, you need more strength endurance on this side. What ends up happening is that when we lump sports together in our system, okay, so the system that we use with training athletes, okay, at Garage Strength, then we say, okay, a type 2 or type 1, we're calling them sport depths. They need more strength endurance over here, so more like bodybuilding style or just more reps, more work, more volume, traditional volume in the weight room. If you're on sport depth 4, sport depth 5, so you're on the other side of football, or the other side of football, you're on the other side of wrestling. Wrestling's in the middle. Now that's where you're going to see lacrosse, soccer. Those are some field hockey, some sports that will have more classical endurance, more interval work. And then the sports in sport depth 5 is where the endurance work that they're doing is literally their training. It's a distance runner who's running 10,000 meter races, a marathoner. Literally their endurance training is their sport. So I think that would be the breakdown of it. And I think oftentimes we forget that strength sports and power sports, or impulse sports is what we should be calling them. We forget that impulse sports still need an aspect of endurance to improve their overall training. It's interesting too, because last night I was watching Christian Thibodeau was talking about how there's so much in that realm of increasing volume, and some athletes that you get that might be, and let's say a sprint cyclist I'll use as an example, they might only be able to handle in the weight room like 8 to 10 working sets. That's it. And they're gassed. The goal would then be, and this goes back to the creatine discussion, is then to get that athlete who can only handle 8 sets, get them on creatine. Hopefully they can handle 10 working sets, and then over time increase their volume to get to the point where they can handle 12 working sets. That's when you start to develop that world-class athlete, that elite level athlete. So, if you're looking at, and I see Andrew in there trolling me on the endurance athlete, Dane Miller, endurance athlete. I did have a 31.5-inch vertical yesterday. I hope you guys saw that on my Instagram. So when Tim Riley, fantastic. That's another person I think we should react to on Peak Strength. That's for Quinn. Tim Riley, I think, does a very good job. I would put him in with that Joey Burgles discussion area as well. What do I recommend for cardio endurance would be, I think you've got to go like 75% of your work should be 45 minutes to an hour and a half if we're doing cardio-based endurance, like assault bike, rower, going out for a run, swimming, anything like that. So if you're like, I got to improve my cardio endurance, 75% of your work should be longer, okay? 25% of your work should be interval based. And I don't mean intervals like Tabatas. A lot of people will say like, oh, I'm doing Tabatas. I'm tough, and it's like, dude, don't do Tabatas. If you want to increase your VO2 max, do something like 5 sets of 4-minute goes. And for 4 minutes, hold your heart rate over at like 90+% of your max heart rate. Like that's where you're going to see the crazy improvement in your VO2 max. You could do, maybe you do 30-second goes as the shortest, but I challenge people to really try to push, like, I think this is called the MAF method, where it's like, the MAF method is like 8 by 8 sets of 800-meter runs. Like, dude, that's hell. That you want to talk toughness, like go out and do that. That's brutal, but it's going to really improve your cardio. For strength endurance, I often will think like drop sets is a great way to improve your strength endurance. Okay, at myo reps, great way to improve your strength endurance. Drop sets at the end of a session where you're doing, trisets of high reps. So let's say your problem area is your triceps. Let's say you do a triset with like clap push-ups, or dips, clap push-ups, tricep push-downs, like a mechanical drop set, something like that. That's a great way to train that strength endurance. Okay, so I think that's some of the stuff that we could all just be a little bit more, we got a poll right now. Does bodybuilding count as endurance training? I think as strength endurance training is what I would like to bring up there. I think that's something that we could definitely include. So if you're watching on YouTube, okay, we're gonna look at some of the hypertrophy work that we did with Brandon George, who's a starting linebacker at Pitt. Okay, so we're looking at here, and this is one of my new favorites right here, push up on a PVC pipe. Okay, this is just a way to prime that nervous system and get things rolling. Okay, I was trying to not speak over myself as much as possible, but so if we just look at, this is like how I like to think about getting more work done in a specific time frame is by doing higher reps, by priming the nervous system more, and by leading to those hypertrophic gains. So I just wanted to show like 2 little clips out of here. Here's a real unique way to do if we're trying to focus on more strength endurance. Okay, some alternating work, some unilateral work here. It's going to help improve your trunk. It's going to help improve your stability, and you're going to get a crazy, crazy freaking pump. All right, so it's like this is one of those great ways to do that. Now, let's go into one more here because I don't want to spend too much time. Of course, we hit if we go here. Okay, so there you can see like a little bit more range of motion.
Shedding those blockers with his grip and his lats. Easy on the shoulder. If we're resting, like,
and that's the other thing. It's like a real quick thing you can do is just decrease your rest period.
That you're playing as combat. This is going to help quite a bit. And then we're going to pair this with a simple version.
Okay, I wanted to move on. Let's move to this next one because this is where we're going to see endurance training for all athletes. Let's see.
Scramble. That's going to be potentially 20 to 30 seconds. And then finally, we're going to get into power endurance and classical.
Dude, swimmers are freaking phenoms.
1 to 2 forms of endurance-based work.
Actually, this is the video. So the NSCA, I believe, watched this. So Brandon George, this is for Andrew. Brandon George did enter the transfer portal, but he went back to Pitt.
Created programming to target the specific problem areas for your specific sport.
David, I don't believe that you're right with that. I do not agree with you, David. I would say look at the research from like Steven Seiler. I would even actually watch some of the videos. What's the guy's name? Inigo. It's like Inigo San Milan. Alex Hutchinson is another one. Peter Attia. The VO2 max work is going to drastically increase by doing Ian Ross, actually, who's on the screen right now for you guys on YouTube. He's got his Olympic trials this weekend, today and tomorrow. He's got his Olympic trials. But going back to David, you're going to see a way better improvement if you're doing 3 to 5 minute goes for like 5 to 6 sets than you will from doing like a Tabata. I don't agree with you, and I think that there's quite a bit of evidence that, like the Norwegian method, what they'll talk about. Like, here's a good one. Actually, Roger Bannister's workout. I'm going to stop using my video on there and talk about this. Is that Roger Bannister's workouts were really based around like 10 by 1 minute goes, so basically like 10 by 400 meter sprints when he broke the 4 minute barrier. Jim Ryan then took that and turned that into 30 1 minute goes, and he was Jim Ryan arguably one of the greatest American distance runners of all time. And then Emil is it Adapek, I think? Emil Adapek. He's from Czechia. At the time, I guess it was Czechoslovakia maybe. I believe he's the only distance runner to ever win the marathon, the 10,000 and the 5,000 in the same Olympics. The greatest distance runner, like as a whole of all time, was known to have a very high, or they suspected to have a very high VO2 max, and it was all from like him training on like 2 to 4 minute goes. I don't think that that's necessarily accurate. I'm not saying that like Tabatas are poor. I think Tabatas are still good. Andrew, a go would be like a pretty much like you're going all out. Like, so if we use the Ingebrigtsens, Josh Kerr does this right now. Josh Kerr's the who I think is probably gonna be the Olympic champ at the 1500 and possibly the 5K. I hope we can splice this and then use it. Yeah, Emil Zapatek. That's for John Paul Castell. Josh Kerr does this quite a bit as well, where they're doing their lactate training. And that's again only about once or twice a week, and that's where I would say about only 25% of your training should be focused on that anaerobic threshold. That's where you're going to see. That's where you're going to end up seeing the big time improvement in your VO2 max. I think the thing that I see with the Tabata protocols is the tolerance of the endurance work, the tolerance of sprint interval training. Sprint interval training will help 100%, but increasing and seeing the capillarization improvements and seeing greater oxygen actually being utilized by your body, I think you're going to see it more from those longer 2 to 4 minute goes. What are my favorite books or my favorite books for training? I would say this is probably my favorite best book that I would recommend. Strength and Power in Sport from Paavo Komi. The Mechanics of Sprinting is another one that I really like right now. Okay, so let's get into this. Best training for strength endurance. Wow, look at that sweet MF Doom shirt from back in the day. I just realized that we got to get through some of this because we're getting some really good questions, and I almost want to just watch. Or how about assault bike? 8 sets of 40 seconds work. So this would be another thing is where I think you go 40 seconds work, a minute and a half rest. I think that's great. I think you could probably do more than just 8 sets, but I think that's fantastic. To be bullied by a 20-year-old sounds like a test of mental skill. Yes. Emil Zapatek. I'm so glad that somebody commented that name because that's just like I'm telling everybody out there, as much as I love Kipchoge and I love Josh Kerr, I love Ingebrigtsen, those guys. Emil Zapatek is just like this. So apparently, from everything that I've read about him, like a dog, a total dog. So yeah, and studying his training and what he was doing, I think is very, very important. Okay, so gosh, I wanted to go into what I had on the whiteboard there. Okay, so if we look at this, you got dynamic work here. That's going to be more fast switch. You got general work, fast and slow. You got localized, so that's going to be more aerobic based, or possibly even more based around what you would be doing for, let's say, bodybuilding. Looks like I was breaking down a paper.
If we're going for a mile run, that's going to be much more slower twitch. Okay, so going back to that fast twitch, we can think about executing a vertical jump. Now, and then finally, if we go into understanding, there might be some instances where we have to have fast twitch muscle fibers and we have to have slow twitch muscle fibers working together.
I think I'm going to close this out because I think we're doing a better job of inside the chat, and I want to get into here. Now we're going to get into some of this stuff around the creatine that we talked about. Just real quick here, okay? There's robust evidence that creatine monohydrate supplementation can enhance short-term, high-intensity exercise and athletics. However, the effect of creatine monohydrate on aerobic performance and its role during aerobic activities is still controversial. So this would be where you hear like quite a bit of endurance athletes would say like, no, you shouldn't take creatine. It's not worth it, right? Like we shouldn't be taking creatine if I'm an 800 meter runner. I don't need creatine if I'm a marathoner. Okay. That's like a pretty standard thing. By the way, if you guys want the in-depth conversations like this, you should tune into our Garage Strength podcast, which is available on Spotify, on Apple iTunes, on Apple, and any other streaming resource. Also, it is also available on YouTube. Okay. The purpose of this systematic review and meta-analysis was to evaluate supplementation effects of creatine on endurance performance in a trained population. So this is interesting because we're talking about athletes that are trained in endurance, okay? So they have a pretty good baseline. 13 studies satisfied the eligibility criteria. So that means there's pretty big, decent pool of data that they can pull from. They excluded studies not evenly distributed around the base of the funnel plot. The results were similar. Okay, conclusions. Creatine monohydrate was shown to be ineffective on endurance performance in a trained population. So when someone is an 800 meter runner, in this case, they might actually, and they're saying that I don't need creatine. They actually likely seem to be showing positive or showing that they probably don't need it. They're actually right. Okay, if you have a 1500 meter individual. Now, what I would do here is I would say, if we're setting up for a peak, they don't need it based off the research. If we have an injury issue, if we have a problem around a specific joint, that might be a different discussion. But as far as this actual paper, I think it's important to realize, like, sometimes when you have intuition that you don't want to take it, you don't need it, oftentimes that does prove out to be pretty accurate. That doesn't mean creatine's ineffective. That still means that I think almost all athletes should be taking it. Effective speed, endurance, and strength training on performance. This was the one I really wanted to do. Okay, so this is where a lot of endurance athletes, wow, why do we need to lift weights? Do we really need to lift weights? What's lifting weights going to do for me? To investigate the effects of combined strength and speed endurance. Combined strength and speed endurance training with a reduced training volume on performance, running economy, and muscular adaptations. So they want to see what ends up happening when you combine strength training and speed endurance, what happens to running economy and the muscular adaptations. Okay, so they took 16 male endurance runners. They all had a VO2 max of 60 milliliters per kilogram. 60 VO2 max is nice. That's good. Okay, that's very good. They were assigned to either combined strength and speed endurance training. For 8 weeks, they did their training they replaced their normal training with speed endurance and strength training, as well as aerobic high and moderate 1 week intensity training with a reduction in total volume of 58%. Okay, whereas they also had a control group. So adding strength training and speed endurance training along with a reduced training volume can improve short-term capacity and induce muscular adaptations related to anaerobic capacity in endurance training runners. Okay, so this goes back to right here. Time to exhaustion, peak blood lactate during an incremental treadmill test was 9%. Higher expression of, potassium. So essentially what they ended up seeing is that if for a short period, let's say you're leading into a peak, or let's say you're trying to get in shape pretty quickly, if you decrease your volume, you do more speed endurance work, and you're lifting weights, you're going to see an improvement in your performance. Okay, your running economy is going to improve. Your muscular adaptations will be favorable towards endurance-based training, and in turn, you're going to be probably more prepared. So this is where effects of speed endurance and strength training on performance, running economy, and muscular adaptations. This is going to show that speed endurance and strength training can be better than just running. Okay, so we do need to keep that in mind. Now, geez, I see some serious questions. I'm gonna get back into the chat now. Let's get back into the chat and freaking steamroll this, because I see a couple of the big questions. Trying to get my mouse over there. A couple of those big questions now. All right, let's go. Yeah, I'm looking at Travis and David. I need a longer time frame to offer my opinion on that. Dr. Brent Rushaw was a sports scientist who did a lot of work related to keeping work intervals short enough that minimal lactic acid builds up. His work was mostly with swimming. So like I think there's a point where I think we need to be aware. I'm reading Andrew's comment that I look younger now than the old ones. I appreciate that quite a bit. I think it's important. So this statement right here, minimal lactic acid buildup. Okay. If you keep work intervals short enough, there's going to be minimal lactic acid buildup. There's a factor where I think once or twice a week, if you're world class, like if you're at the elite level, once or twice a week, I think it's very important to get your lactic acid actually to build up. And I think that's when you'll see triathletes, and you'll see 1,500 meter runners. You'll see 3K steeplechasers. You'll see 5K runners. And this is like, if we looked at, they're going to do long, slow distance work. Okay. So they're doing like 12, let's say a 15-kilometer run in the morning and then a 15-kilometer run at night. Like this is like some of the work these guys are doing. They don't want lactic acid buildup in those cases. They don't want it. Okay, they just want to get that volume in. Then they might do something like an interval workout where you do an interval workout and you take your lactic, the amount of lactate in your blood, okay? So they'll take a blood sample and they want to keep it around 2. So they try to slowly increase the tempo while keeping it on the measurement around 2. I think it's like 2 nanograms or something like that per liter. I've got to look up the exact measurement standard, but they want to keep that right around 2. That's going to help keep lactic acid lower, and they can slowly build up their pace. So if in week 1 they're running a 6-minute or 5-minute pace for a mile, let's say, and they're doing repeats, by week 4 they want to see if they can have the same lactic acid buildup in their blood at like a 440 pace. But there also is typically 1 or 2 workouts a week where they want to get that number up to like 8 or 9, like stupid high. Like pull the brakes off. We're going full tilt. You're running as hard as possible for a minute and a half, 2 minutes straight up this hill. And we're going to run until your legs feel like you can't walk. Then we're going to take your blood sample. You're going to walk back down and we're going to repeat it. And we're going to try and just increase that as high as possible. So like, I think the problem is and I'm not saying that Brent Rushaw has done bad work. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is there's a point in training to keep your blood lactate low. There's also a point to monitor it and see how high you can push it and just play on that line of when it gets past 2. But then there's also a point of like, we're going full tilt once or twice a week, typically once for most athletes, because it does take a while to recover from. And we're going all in, and we're going to see if that also helps feed those later workouts. And then obviously there needs to be a point of periodization. And the way I look at this and this is like traditional endurance aspects, like if we're talking about a distance runner or a triathlete or something like that, when we start to look at stuff like that and understand, it's no different than periodizing strength training. Okay, so if you look at like strength training and peak strength in the app, we're breaking it down into like leg power day, upper body power day, athlete day, impulse day, hypertrophy day, right? Like you're playing with those things and you're sort of going back and forth. And then depending upon the sport and if you're in season or out of season, we tweak things based on that. We pull things up, we lower things. We might decrease max strength when we're in season. We might back off some jumps if we're getting closer to a peak, things like that. That's what we're doing. When we're looking at the endurance work, and what's cool is that this stuff's going into the app by the end of May, early June. We're going to have all this speed stuff and endurance stuff built out. When you look at endurance stuff, I look at like those 3 to 4 minute goes. That's making your heart more explosive. So it's like, how much blood can your heart pump out? How explosive is your heart really? So that every time it beats, it's strong enough and it's pushing blood throughout your body. The next thing is then to look at like the long, slow distance work will increase the amount of blood that's actually in your body. Okay, so if I have a larger amount of blood in my body, now I will have more oxygen in my body. And then when I am able to push more blood throughout my body, and my body has made these adaptations, we've created more capillaries. Now, from those adaptations, my body can then the muscles will pull in the blood, they'll metabolize that to create more ATP, and then in turn, I will be oxygenated better so that I can roll with more ATP at a higher pace. But the long, slow distance to me is almost like the max strength. Okay. The high interval work of like 3 to 4 minute goes, that's like the cleans. That's like the impulse work. That's like the plyometrics. And I think when we can get strength coaches to see it that way, I think it helps. And I think like the burnout sessions of like score 8 on the lactate blood meter, run hill sprints till you feel like your legs are going to fall off. To me, those are like the sessions, like a bodybuilding session. Those are the sessions that when you can adapt to that once a week session like that, and you can handle it, you'll see an improvement in your max strength, and you'll see an improvement in your impulse. You'll see an improvement in your total blood volume. You'll see an improvement in how much your heart can pump out. I think that's like the carryover that we sort of have missed in the world of practicality. I think in the world of theory and research, it's been there, but in the world of practical application, we've missed that. I hope that helps you guys understand where I look at this. I think for Travis and David, I think I need to spend more time looking at those things that you have mentioned. I can tell you right now, I don't think any of those guys. For me, the best would be Aaron Gadsden. Is one of his athletes just got 4th at the Indoor World Championships in the triple jump. His main athlete, Thea Lafon, Young, she just won the Indoor World Championship in the triple jump, top 10 jump of all time. I've talked about him in the past, and I think as far as speed and impulse work, he's by far and away the best out there, I think, relative to some of these other guys that you're talking about. I think Brian Kula, from what I've seen, he does some neat stuff. I'd have to look at those other ones. One of the individuals you mentioned, though, I want to bring up, I was at a conference with one of the individuals that Travis mentioned, and he does like some hamstring thing, like some weird hamstring, like priming your hamstring. We'll fix all of your hamstring pulls. And I was at a conference in Wisconsin. And so he was, and I'm pretty sure I've shared this story in the past. He's sitting on one side of me, this individual that does the hamstring, preventing hamstring pulls from happening. He's sitting here. And the guy over here is a track coach. And he's talking about how they have a lot of hamstring issues, this guy over here. And he also presented at the conference. And he's like, yeah, we're doing well. We're dealing with a lot of hamstring problems. And he's like going on and on about how they have these hamstring problems. And I was like, well, you need to talk to him, because apparently what he's working on is going to fix everything that you're doing. And this dude who just told me that their whole team's decimated by hamstrings tells me that this guy who is supposedly like this guru on fixing hamstring issues is already working with the team. And I'm sitting there like, wait, what? So like, are you selling snake oil, or are you actually like doing something? And that's just like something that, I don't know. Stuff like that bothers me. It'd be like somebody hiring me to like improve somebody's vertical jump or broad jump and like just totally ruining it, which I know is not ever going to happen. By the way, Taiji, or one guy had a pro day. He increased his broad jump by 11.5%. He went from 9.2 or something to 10.3. He increased his vert from 28.6 to 34.5 in 64 days, just to throw that out there. Coach, what are your thoughts on Louis Simmons saying he mainly benches by stopping an inch above the chest and doing a rapid reversal? I think that's an interesting way. It's almost like decelerate, rapid stretch shortening. The other thing is, too, is like with Louis Simmons, when in that regard, he was doing mainly focusing on powerlifting. So we need to keep that in mind. I'm going to look into that Brent Rushall, David, though. I'm going to look into Brent. I think that if you have any papers that, David, if you have any papers that you want us to look at, post them in the live chat and I'll check them out. How would a workout split look like for a soccer player to get more explosive with team trainings on Tuesday and Wednesday. So I don't know if this is Thursday or Tuesday because it's like a direct Tuesday. Either way, if it's Tuesday, Wednesday, I would base all the explosive work probably on, if it's Tuesday, Wednesday, I base your explosive work on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, okay? Or Friday and Sunday, or Saturday and Sunday. And if it's Thursday, I would make it on Saturday and Monday, something like that. We would use... It was not the individual David just mentioned. It's one of the other guys. We would use the landmine. I don't think it's great. I think the landmine for rotational strength, meh. I think it's better to actually, I think cables can be better. I think throwing medicine balls can be better. I think plate work is better. I think plate work hooked into different aspects can be better. I just got a message on Instagram. As a sophomore running back, 5'9", 185, benches 315, squats 410, clean 190. Which of those needs work? Clean. You should be cleaning like 315. But those other numbers are great. That's solid. Dane, who are you learning the most from currently in regards to endurance? I think... right now, for me, Alex Hutchinson for sure, but also Steven Seiler, I would say. Steven Seiler would be my main person that I'm learning the most from, especially as like a baseline. I think he has the best baseline of knowledge to pull from, and that is also available online. I think he does a very good job of like the introduction to what endurance adaptations are. What are the heart adaptations that you're going to see? What are the capillary adaptations that you're going to see? And then this is what happens. And then this is when you can make those gains. Inigo San Milan would be another fantastic resource. I think the issue with both of them, they're going to be cycling related, but I think it's important for sports performance coaches to recognize it's important for us to learn the adaptations that occur from different types of endurance work. Okay. And those adaptations should be coinciding with the sports and what the like work to rest ratios are within sports. And if those sports are doing locomotive work or not. Like a sport like wrestling, what makes it so hard or interesting is like a sport like wrestling doesn't really have locomotion work. You're never really cyclically running, but they need to have a really high VO2 max, and they also need to be really strong. So it's like, all right, so you take something like you take somebody in wrestling and you say, okay, so if we're training, we need to get these types of adaptations, and we can get them on the bike. We could also get them on the mat. And then you start to look at even, there's a paper from 2020 on double leg takedowns. And they actually talk about how untrained or lower level wrestlers versus high level wrestlers, what the comparison of peak velocity, of rate of force development, what the differences are, and then where they see greater force application in like trunk control, because they actually break it down into like parts of the cervical spine had a very high power output, which is not really common in other sports. So if you take wrestling, for example, and you can learn about those endurance adaptations, but then you can also take the adaptations of impulse that you're working towards, you can figure out like that little puzzle to piece together to make the wrestling training the best, to make the cycling training the best, to make the training for, like, look at lacrosse. It's like, okay, well, they have a high component of speed. Ryan Tarafenko, when he plays indoor lacrosse, when we're working with him, he's a NCAA All-American. He needs to be fast, but he also has to have the go. He has to be able to run like a 18 to 20 minute 5K relatively easily. And so he's got to be able at the same time to run like a 4.840. And so you've got to balance those things. I'd say it's just like swimming too. Swimming right now, we've got a D3 NCAAs is this weekend. Ella Robertson swims for MIT. So she's got to be really, really strong, okay, to do pull-ups and hit like a big power output for her lat strength. But then she also has to have the endurance and have those adaptations that we're working towards of having more blood volume, of having an explosive heart capacity, right? So it's like, how do you balance that so that she can go win a D3 national championship on her 200 medley relay, which she just did as a freshman. So that's like some of the stuff that we try to factor in when we're laying all this out. What's your strength standard to be a D1 athlete for football? I think it really is, the strength standards are going to be dependent upon what position, but 5'11", 190, D1 athlete for football, you're probably a safety, I would assume. Vert over 30 inches. I would say like a power clean over 265 to 275, back squat 405 plus, bench press 315 or more, power snatch like 80 kilos, and you could do that. Somebody, what's the best endurance for a soccer player? This is an interesting question because it comes down to what type of work are they doing on the pitch during practice. And that's what I would want to know in that issue is like, how much endurance work are they doing during practice? That's a big factor. Gas tank for sports like boxing and MMA, I think would come down to how far out from a big fight are they. Hill sprints for endurance, I think, are like the easiest thing to do. Okay, the easiest. Like the all encompassing, like the transfer of training is crazy. David said, training method is best described as ultra short race pace. Ultra short. Michael Andrew won a gold medal using it in his last Olympics. David, if you DM me on Instagram, Ghostface D Milla, can you send me that on Instagram and I will check it out. I will read as much as I can and we can talk about it next week. I'd love to do that. Earl says, Dane, what is the minimal amount of rest to be used for plyometrics if the goal is to train wrestling scrambles around power output? Can you mix in technical coordinations and plyometrics? I would say this. If I'm further out from a peak, I would make that rest period a lot longer between a plyometric series. And if I was getting closer to a peak, I would make the rest a little bit shorter. For a complex, I think you could do like a power clean, rest 25 to 30 seconds, and then get into some type of plyometric series. I do think you could do that. What would your benchmarks be to be considered someone as an athletic dad? Dude, that's so I think that would be, I think that's like, just trying to think for Andrew. I think that's like we got to make that body weight based, like maybe like a 1.4 bench, a pull up with like 0.3 body weight, something like that. You got to run a 5K in under 30 minutes. So we could do something really cool with that. Theoretical strength standards. So Zach, I want to answer this. And I feel like we need to be doing I feel like I need to be doing something for bouldering. I think I do. And if Zach, also, if you follow me on Instagram, send me a DM of like any other strength videos that I should watch. And I think I'll do that if I should watch stuff around bouldering. I think the thing with the dad statement, Father's Day video, is that you guys have to have at least a 31.5 inch vertical. If you don't have a 31.5 inch vertical, you're not a fit dad. You're a fat dad. Best plyometrics for a soccer goalie. I like to think about, this is a good one. Okay, so if this is the goal, right? If this is the goal, I hope you guys can see this. People forget that goalies don't just go this way. Goalies have to come on angles like this. That's how they cut off a shot. So we need to train a lot of like acceleration. So actually like sled pulls is really good. 49.8 VO2 max, that's great. So sled pulls is very good, okay, here, to improve that acceleration to cut something off. You do also need some lateral plyometrics, like a depth drop to a side jump or a side jump with a kettlebell hold, like something like that. So I think what we forget with goalies, they have to jump very high. They have to accelerate on an angle to cut off shots, and they have to move laterally. And so we got to figure that out for our training. And I think that's ultimately some of those key factors. All right, I'm going to head down to training because at the end of the day, we've always got to remember I'm still coaching and I'm still trying to coach as much as possible. Very few people that are out on the internet are still doing that. How much endurance do sprinters need? 200 to 400 meters, 3 sets, once a week, and you'll be good. Maybe a little bit more. So I'm gonna head out and get down to training. Until next time, peace.